Hello, I'm Imara Jones, and welcome back to Lives at Stake, a series of monthly discussions about critical issues facing transgender and gender nonconforming communities across the United States. Lives at Stake is a co-production of my project Translash and WNYC's The Green Space. Visit translash.org and thegreenspace.org to follow our work. Well, 2020 has been lots of things, and among them is the fact that it has been a record-setting year for the deaths of trans women, and the year isn't even over. So far, 28 trans women have been murdered. As my earring falls off, 28 trans women have been murdered, with many of those going unreported. This exceeds last year's number of 24 and continues the epic levels of violence that have reached a series of new highs since 2016. I wonder why. In fact, the United States, sadly, has more murders of trans women than any other country on the planet, except for Brazil or Mexico, with 9 out of 10 of those murdered Black or Latinx. That's why tonight we're going to unpack what's behind the recent spate of violence and ways that we can end it, because there are ways that we can end it. Joining the discussion tonight is Bev Tillery, who is the Executive Director of the Anti-Violence Project. Mariah Moore, who is the co-president of New Orleans's House of Tulip, and Lana, Madison, Labeija, a sex worker and survivor of violence, who will bravely be telling her story tonight for the very first time. Now, tonight's topic is going to be heavy, and we believe that that's why we want to have you involved in the conversation as a part of our community. So we need you to send in your comments and your questions throughout. You can do that in the timeline below, both on YouTube, those of you who are watching live there, as well as those who are watching live on Facebook. You can do so by using the hashtags Lives at Stake and or Translash on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, as I mentioned, and we will be sure to fold all of those in the program. Please make sure to do that. Now, like every single program, we're going to start tonight with a series of means and gifts that are getting us through during a week that is already beyond tough. I think that is an understatement. So first off, we're going to turn to the Emmys that were on Sunday. Of course, it was a breakthrough year at the Emmys for artists like Zendaya and shows like Schitt's Creek, but the ratings for the Emmys were down by double digits, and they cut off Laverne Cox's mic. So maybe a good meme for the Emmys this year is this fire extinguisher scene between Jennifer Aniston and Jimmy Kimmel. It's also the fact that we are also this week continuing to mourn the loss of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the icon of social justice. But many people are also still mourning the death, continuing to, of Chadwick Boseman of Black Panther fame. And so some people took it a little too far, saying that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would be entering heaven, saying Wakanda forever. I don't know about you, but it's her arms here which creep me out the most, more than anything. But perhaps the meme which says everything about who she was and encapsulates her career is her slaying the devil of sexism here, totally unbothered with her crown, totally in place as well. She will be missed. And of course, during this week in which there was the judgment yesterday, or the announcement of the charges against, or rather the lack of charges, the police involved in the death of Breonna Taylor, there's of course no meme, no gifts that can make us feel better about that. Before turning to the heart of our program tonight, we wanted to underscore that we will be discussing violence in graphic details tonight, particularly in the second segment. So we wanted to give you a warning about that up front. We'll be doing that again right before the second segment, so that you can make any adjustments that you need and how you experience us tonight to feel safe and comfortable. We want to make sure that that happens. So on now to the heart of our program. First up tonight is Bev Tillery, who is the Executive Director of the Anti-Violence Project here in New York, to help frame the conversation of violence for us tonight. In full disclosure, I'm a member of the board of AVP, so we have that disclosure, journalistic disclosure out of the way so that you can judge the conversation with that information in mind. Bev, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, Imara, thanks for having me.
Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna continue to do this with one earring on. Maybe I'll start a trend.
Hey, looks good to me.
Thank you so much. So we're already breaking records this year. And as I said in the setup, the year isn't even over. And I'm wondering if you can tell us from where you sit, what's behind this spasm of violence this year that we are continuing to experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm still today reeling from the news about Breonna Taylor. And so it's hard to enter this conversation without talking about the fact that we are living in a society where the lives of Black women aren't valued. And then adding to that, the fact that, we have this growing sentiment that trans people are not valued. So, we're seeing over and over again that, the lives of trans women are not valued, particularly Black trans women in our society. And we haven't had any real strong leadership, really, certainly not nationally, but even in most of our local communities, standing up to say that this violence is wrong, that something has to happen about it. And instead, we've seen a very proactive federal government and leadership really trying to dismantle the rights of trans and gender nonconforming folks across the country. So all of that combined with the fact that we also have a climate of increased hate violence in the country. Unfortunately, it's no wonder why we are seeing this increased violence, and it has been increasing, as you said, year after year over the last few years. And it's very significant. And, I also just wanted to point out that of the 28 folks that you mentioned that we've lost this year, 2 of those have been lost to police violence as well, Imara. So people are experiencing and seeing violence in all aspects of their lives. And that violence is becoming more severe and unfortunately is leading to people losing their lives.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, it seems like there are 2 levels of the violence. It's one on the part, as you mentioned, there's this atmosphere of violence in the society and hate crimes. And then there's police violence. But then there's also this community level violence that takes place around what we seem to perceive about the value that people place or don't place on the lives of trans women. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about kind of that, all these different levels of violence and how they take place, particularly around this devaluing where so many of the murders that happen, for example, the suspects act as if they haven't done anything wrong.
Right. I mean, we see so often that, like you said, there are different kinds of violence, and we talk about the homicides so much. But I think it means that people are forgetting that, we're talking to trans folks who are experiencing daily violence from, the violence that they're experiencing in the street, but also violence that they're experiencing in their communities, in their homes, and their workplaces, combined with the state violence. And we think about state violence, we're not just thinking about police violence, but we're also thinking about all the ways that the state is devaluing and taking away the rights of trans and gender nonconforming people, denying them access to the services and the support that they need, education, housing, all of those things add up and really add to and piling on of violence that, you can't get away from.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the solutions to the violence that people face? I mean, I think It's also important for us to say that besides the homicides, as you say, that we focus on, there are hundreds of survivors from every single incident that we hear about. We're going to hear one of those later tonight. And they also need support and help, and can face recurring types of violence as well, not only experiencing violence one time, but in many different ways. So with all of that, I'm wondering what you think some of the solutions are that you're seeing, both here in New York, that you think are really important, either proposed or happen or unfolding, as well as across the country.
Yeah, we have been bringing together trans and gender non-conforming folks for years now, and consistently people say some of the things that they need to end violence are all of those things that we all need every day to be able to live safe, secure lives. As I said before, housing, the violence that people experience in the street, in shelters when they're trying to get safe. It is continuing, and there aren't safe places for people to go. Education, jobs, access to all of those things, mental health services. And for trans and gender nonconforming folks, one of the things that we often miss is that those services and supports have to be provided in a trans affirming way. And there are very few services right now where people can go and know that they are going to be respected, again, valued and affirmed as trans and gender nonconforming people. So we have to put together policies in our cities and our states to make sure that there are resources given to the people that are providing those services, that the trans and gender nonconforming led organizations are getting the resources that they need to provide services. Because who are people going to go to? They're going to go to the organizations that they trust and they know in their communities. And if those organizations are not getting the resources that they need, then they're not helping trans and gender nonconforming folks. People repeatedly are seeking services and being met again with additional violence by providers who, even if they're well-meaning, do not understand trans and gender nonconforming folks, are not meeting their needs, and in some cases are adding to the violence and the trauma that people are experiencing daily. So we're pulling together policies and moving forward a policy agenda in New York City. Other folks are doing that in their communities. And we've been looking at ways to create safety in community that doesn't rely on police systems and criminal legal systems that, again, usually end up creating more violence for our communities.
Yeah, on the police front, I mean, we've seen all of these incidences this year where police are called to respond to someone in distress, and then the person that they're there to help somehow ends up dying or murdering. So I think we can understand that. And also, as you say, it's really important for us to think about the fact that violence, the murders and physical violence don't only take place in isolation, that all of these other things, such as housing and economic support and a whole host of other things, actually can help people live a life with less violence. And we know that to be the case. So we want to try to shift some of those paradigms. One of the things that people will always say is that, okay, you've given us the things that we need to change as a society, but so often people will ask, what can I do personally? What are the things that what are the ways that I can support or make sure that we lower violence from a personal standpoint? What do you say to those people?
If you have a will, there's so many things that people can do. First of all, make sure that you're educating yourself about the trans and gender nonconforming organizations and people in your communities. Find out what they need, what kinds of support they're looking for, and stand up to help provide those. You know, in addition, I think there's so many times where we hear from people that they experience violence on the street, on the subway, as they were going to work, trying to shop in a store, and nobody said anything or did anything. And so it's an easy thing to interrupt that behavior and to stand up and say that's not okay. If you hear an instant where trans and gender nonconforming people are being made a joke, stop it and say that's not okay. All of that perpetuates the climate where violence is okay. And we have to change that dynamic and really say that violence is not okay. It's not okay. It's not going to be happening on my watch. So I think that there's so many ways that people can take a step every day. And if for some reason you don't know any trans or gender nonconforming folks in your community or where you live, there are lots of organizations that are trans-led, that are supporting the trans community, that you can connect with to get more information. There's really no excuse for anybody at this point. And, you know, I just want to say, Imara, too, that I especially want to call on cisgender women because I feel as women, we need to stand up for all women. And we cannot perpetuate the conversation that trans women are not women. It's on us as cis women to really just stop that. And so I call on all cis women to really take a stand for your trans sisters and make a point of talking to people, you know, in your family who you wouldn't normally talk to about, you know, why it's important to stop violence against trans folks. You know, speak out to your local elected officials and ask them what they're doing. What are they doing to stop violence against trans folks? I think that every day there's something that we each can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really important point. There are so many ways, especially for Black women, that the deaths of Black trans women and the deaths of Black women overall mirror each other, specifically through intimate partner violence. It's pretty much tracks very similarly. So as you say, you know, there are all these commonalities between the violence of all women, especially women of color, cis and trans. And the point that you made that there's so many things that we can do, even if you don't know a trans person, from standing up for trans women individually to intervening violence when you see it to supporting organizations. As you say, if you have a will, there's so many more things that you can do. Well, I thank you for joining us tonight. I think that we are all, like you, processing and having conversations in the shadow of yesterday's announcement of the lack of charges involved in the death of Breonna Taylor. My heart goes out to you and to all of us as we continue to find a way how to hold space for ourselves and others as we grieve.
Yeah, for me, I get through the grief by action. So thanks for this, and you know, let's keep working.
Let's keep working. Thank you so much for joining us. That was and is Bev Tillery, who is the executive director of the Anti-Violence Project. You're watching Lives at Stake. So before we turn to our next guest, I would like to just give a reminder to everyone that during this particular conversation, we will be talking about graphic violence that occurred, and want to give you the chance to make yourself feel safe in whatever you need, in whatever way you need to during this particular conversation. If you feel the need to mute us for a little bit, you should know that this conversation will probably go for about 12 minutes or so, and then you can come back and join us for the last conversation if that's what you need to do. But we want to give you that heads up before moving forward. Well, right now I am so honored to have Lana Madison Labeija join us. Lana is a sex worker and a survivor of violence. She will be telling us her story for the very first time Tonight, we'll be hearing the details of what happened to her and why the result of her case underscores our collective responsibility in ending violence. I want to say that we had planned to have Lana tonight as an anonymous guest, but just hours ago, she decided to come on camera to reveal her name as a sign of her bravery and her recovery and also her inspiration to other people. And so I want to just thank Lana for that and bring you into the conversation. Lana, we're so glad to have you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Imara, and providing this platform and safety for me to share my story. It's really important. And I also would like to thank Beverly from AVP. They were part of, the org that was there for me right after and helped me through the grieving process, navigating the justice system that was not there. So, yes, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Of course, thank you. And I just want to remind our audience to please send your comments and your questions using the hashtag Lives at Stake or Translash across Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter as well. So Lana, can you take us through what happened to you? What was the case of violence that was visited upon you personally?
Okay, so I'm a sex worker and I was on tour here in New York City for the very first time. And I had gone to an out call. To define that for people who aren't familiar with sex work lingo is when the escort or sex worker goes to the client's house or hotel room. And so he had me over at his place where he resided. And within, 30 minutes of hanging out and trying to, collect my my compensation for my time before, we went into, exchange the sexual services, I try to get that money up front so I'm not, scammed. And so we're hanging out, and by the third time I had, asked him for my compensation, and us hanging out for 30 minutes with him trying to watching me drink this drink that I was pretending to drink. He brings me to the third floor of his house where he said the money was, and so we were going to go up there to get it. He had been locking behind him 5 deadbolted doors, and I wasn't aware of it until I end up making my escape. But when we get to the third floor, I kind of I ask him, final time, I'm like, hey, as I'm like trying to be get things kind of going, he comes up from behind me. I see over the peripheral of my view to my right him coming around with a box cutter going for my throat. And I turned, that's, I didn't really know what was really happening, and not knowing, this is real and this is happening to me. And I quickly responded by turning towards him and using my arm to grab his wrist that was going towards my throat, and I was able to, keep him back from reaching it. And there was about a 5-minute fight and wrestle of me trying to escape. That's your first instinct is, one, try to, keep what he's attacking me with away from me, but 2, also let me get the fuck out of here. And where am I? This is my first time in the city, And it's just I'm lost, you know, and not really understanding the seriousness, you know, of like my life right here is being attempted to take away from me. So I tried to escape, and you know, the door was dead bolted, and that's when, you know, I realized the door was dead bolted. And so he had pulled my legs from behind, and I had ended all the deadbolts, you know, were deadbolts from like behind, and every room had that because the 3-story brownstone was all individually, you know, set up to where each floor could, you know, be locked. And so I was laying on my back and had to unlock that door, and it was 5 of those that happened. And he had uh, cut my throat 5 times by the time I had escaped, and he threw me down 2 flights of stairs. And yeah, I survived it by a miracle. And so today, yes, this is my first time sharing this publicly and talking about it. And I
Yeah, I think, you know, I think you survived it because you fought. I think, you know, we haven't gone through all the details, and unfortunately don't have the time to, but it was a harrowing escape for you to leave that house while injured, while repeatedly injured, while being beaten and yeah, on the way out. So and then you had to escape the property by climbing over a fence. It was alive. It was alive. I'm wondering, so you escaped, people found you, the police came, and unlike in so many cases, the police took your case seriously and the prosecutor took your case seriously. I'm wondering what happened after that and how you felt about the response from the police.
You know, I'm in a white body, and I experience navigate this world with privilege. And now with these institutions, police, you know, approach me, you know, they approached me from the very get-go and beginning. You know, I was very nervous and on edge, me being a sex worker, and how, you know, the police were going to treat me and respond to it. But my experience was, it was very positive. And it was also because I got to see very clearly, and they were very transparent and upfront too, why they were helping me. And it's because I didn't, quote unquote, look like what a prostitute looks like, and also what a trans person is supposed to look like. They were just shocked and stunned, you know, when I told them I'm a trans sex worker and he was a client, and they were just like, you know, they were telling me this, you know, and just like, it was like just unbelievable, you know, after I just got out of that, you know, they're showing their assholes, you know. And but yes, they were really, you know, supportive to me because of that. And the DA, when they picked it up as well, that was, you know, also a, you know, they were, you know, prosecuting on my behalf, trying to get this guy, you know, locked up. And unfortunately, the grand jury just like, I think it's when they acquit. I think I think that was what today for Breonna Taylor, it was the grand jury that had acquitted the men. And so I think it was similar kind of case where the grand jury determined to not move forward with the charges. And and we were all very confident, the DA's office, everyone kept assuring me that this is a ballpark case. And so it was just very startling when I got the phone call a week later after the grand jury that the charges, were dropped and he was acquitted. So, and that was because of the institutions like the DA's office or the police. Sure, they could have done better jobs in terms of like presenting their evidence and fighting for, they could have fought in a different manner and whatnot. But I think, there's a saying apparently within, law culture about it's really easy to get an indictment and anyone can get an indictment. Just so it was very, for him to not get an indictment was really telling in terms of, of the prejudice of a jury and a bias when they are, dealing with trans people, sex workers, people of color, and not, serving the best interests of the victims. And in the case of me, and so, yes, I've had to live with, this having survived a really traumatic thing and live with that PTSD and live with the fears and, and always have to have these flashbacks, but also live, knowing, a grand jury in Brooklyn, New York didn't see my humanity. And I don't know what's worse to have to, live with, because one is, my future. And I, as a survivor, if this was to ever happen to me again, I would do everything in my power to avoid going through that justice system. And that's also something going forward in my life. What does justice look like? And having to put a new lens on my face and reframe, kind of what I had always thought and what justice was, taught to me, and reframe it and really, see it in a different light of, how do I find justice for something like this. And that's been, in terms of navigating the world and healing and with my road to recovery from this act of violence, it's been that, and asking those questions.
Yeah, I think it's really important, all of the things that you have taken us through, particularly the impact of the violence on your life, because I think that one of the things that gets so lost in these conversations about violence and about death of trans women is the understanding that, as you said, that trans people, trans women are human beings. And consequently, telling people tonight how it's impacted your life has been really consequential. And also this piece that you just shared about the damage that not receiving justice through the justice system has had, and how it would make you skeptical in reporting anything that might happen in the future, which is also, I think, a reality. One of the things I think I just wanted to highlight for people, because I think it's really important, is that, essentially the only thing that you were asked by the grand jury or to explain to the grand jury is whether or not you were a sex worker or not, and what that meant. And so that seemed to be a big way that they judged whether or not they were going to hold this person who had kidnapped you and had tried to kill you to account. That seemed to be, and I'm just wondering if you can just tell us that experience when you went in and they just asked you, I think one or two questions.
So, when we spent about 6 hours that day with the DA trying to prepare me and, get what he was gonna, ask me before, we spent 6 hours of him re-traumatizing me pretty much. And by the time I got before a grand jury. I don't know if he just didn't want to continue because I was too shaken up, but he asked me like 3 or 4 questions, which was, what was my name? What do, and what do I do for a living? And I tell him I'm a sex worker. And then he asked, what is a sex worker? Define that to the grand jury. So I define, I sell sex for money. And, and then the next question was, oh, what happened to you? And this was right after the assault, about 6 weeks after. So I still had, knife slashes on my throat. So I just unwrap my scarf and show the grand jury. And I'm like, do I need to go any further? Well, then the next day, the grand jury, the assailant shows up to the grand jury and gets to tell his whole side of BS, whichever that was. And this is all undisclosed. Everything is, private and kept private. So I don't know what he says. And I don't know how many minutes he's before a grand jury to persuade them with whatever, and but I mean, I do know what he said because but this was all off the record. But the DA and the cops had already prepared me, under the table of kind of being like, just so and you're not thrown off, but like he's gonna be claiming you're hooker was trying to rob him, like, and I'm, how did I end up in the 3rd floor, but with trails of my blood down, stairs. So it's just like, and that's what, was supposed to like that should have easily just been rebutted. And yes, the grand jury or the DA's office failed in the sense of I wasn't able to, they weren't fighting with all the evidence of being, like I just don't know how it wasn't clear to a grand jury. And but also it was how the assailant went and spoke. Usually what I've been told from like AVP lawyers were that the assailant never goes before the grand jury. Their lawyer usually will keep them, but this guy is a sociopathic, serial attacker. And I'm glad I'm here today because, I can share and I've lived his story, but I am so afraid he's going to strike again. And he made some, very, insinuating comments about how he's tried to see other girls. Also, an escort agency had him blacklisted for getting very violent with their providers. And so, it's like he's a cold-blooded killer. And the cops had told me that when they interviewed him. They pulled me outside and were like, sweetheart, my 6 years as a detective in Greenpoint, I've never met a psychopath. And just by interviewing him, it was like a cold-blooded killer I was interviewing. And that was just chilling down my spine as I'm telling that. But in that moment, I was thinking of, I never wanted to ever see one person could be responsible for something this sadistic. To me, I always saw everything as, there's something much larger that is why he did it. I was thinking I was a victim of someone trying to traffic me, but, it didn't make sense. And the cops were just telling me, no, sweetheart, sometimes it's just as simple. There's sick, evil people out there. And you're a trans sex worker and they were targeting you for that reason. And yeah.
Well, I wanted to just thank you for telling your story, for trusting us, trusting me to come on and to share your story tonight. It was harrowing. I know that I speak for everyone that we are glad that you survived. While you were speaking, you received some audience comments from people like Jeslyn, who said to just tell you that that they thank you for coming forward and that they're sending you a lot of love. So there are a lot of strangers that you don't know who are sending you love tonight. And I know that one of the reasons why you wanted to come forward was that you wanted to let people know that this person was still here and free in Brooklyn, and you wanted to warn about what's possible, what's out there. So.
And live in Brooklyn, and I live here now, so I'm not gonna run from my trauma, and I'm here, to face you know, it head on and, you know, honestly be as close as I can, you know, to the place that is the most terrifying and reclaim my power. And the moment I moved here, it was, you know, the first day it was like, your power never left you, you know, and it's always here. And so if I could tell anyone listening, it's, you know, yes, we all have power in us. And so thank you for giving me this platform.
Thank you so much, and thank you for leaving us with that extremely powerful message about the fact that we all have power. I know that I speak for everyone where we wish you all the best in your recovery and dealing with your trauma and in reclaiming your power even more. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. That is Lana Madison Labeija, who is a sex worker and a survivor of violence, who told us her story for the very first time tonight. You're watching Lives at Stake. Well, next up, we will be speaking to the one, the only Mariah Moore, who is co-president of the House of Tulip, an organization in New Orleans, which takes a comprehensive approach to dealing with violence, from economic to housing insecurity to health insecurity. As I've written about before, we have to take that approach in order to be able to deal with violence. It's not only the specific incidences, but the environment surrounding violence. We're also thrilled to be talking to Mariah because she was just named to the Route 100 as one of the most influential African Americans. So for so many reasons, Mariah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Imara.
Thank you, thank you. So the House of Tulip is really, you know, a microcosm of so many positive things and approaches to deal with violence, as I mentioned, from housing insecurity to health insecurity to economic insecurity and so many other services that you all are connecting people with. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about why you started House of Tulip with your co-president Milan.
Yeah, so thank you so much again for that beautiful introduction. So myself and Milan Cherry, who is also one of the co-founders and co-directors of the House of Tulip alongside myself, came together to fulfill a need that we saw, a continuous need that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic that we always knew existed. But more personally for me, I think I was so invested because of my many life experiences, right? I am a former sex worker. I am a survivor of anti-trans violence. While engaging in sex work, I have faced housing insecurity, food insecurity, amongst a plethora of other obstacles and barriers in my life. And so it was so important when I came together with other community leaders here in New Orleans, and we participated in our COVID crisis relief fund, which provided about $20,000 that was redistributed directly to community in response to the need caused by the pandemic. And myself and Milan came together after we concluded the COVID crisis fund to really think about ways in which we could provide long-term solutions for our community. And the thing that we landed on was housing, because we know that housing is the first step to addressing all of the other issue areas like employment, linkage to care. So just really thinking about, like we talked about yesterday, really having a big solution for a big problem, you know, bringing community together and really creating a network of sisterhood and siblinghood that many of us don't have. And many of us will, you know, experience a lot of the things that we're addressing. So that was my main reason for coming together with Milan to create the House of Tulip. And I'm sorry, today has been a really rough day. There's been a lot going on, so if I stumble a little bit, please excuse me.
No, it is a very rough day. It is a very rough day. On this particular point, I think one of the things that's innovative about the House of Tulip is the fact that you actually put the goal of building assets and ownership for trans women. You have a model of building a desire to build this community where you're raising money to build homes for trans women, that you will eventually help trans women put down payments on properties, that you're trying to create an ownership model. And I think that the reason why that's important, people may not realize, is that we know that, for example, if you make less than $24,000 a year, you are 3 times more likely as a woman to be susceptible to violence than if you make $75,000 a year. So in so many ways, violence is an economics issue. And that's one of the things that you are approaching and attacking. And I'm wondering what you're finding the response to that is when you say, look, we're raising money to make sure that trans women can have assets.
Yes, absolutely. So not just trans women, the entire TGNC community, right? So
yes.
with a razor sharp lens on the most marginalized, which include Black trans women and femmes, undocumented folks with disabilities. But the response has been an overwhelming outpour of support. I think that a lot of people really have been waiting on something like this that really addresses not just one issue area, but every issue area, right? Fully and true wraparound services, but also having a plan of growth. And like you said, assets, not just saying this is a shelter and it ends here, because it doesn't end here. We want to walk through life with you, grow with you, and then see you off so that you can see someone else through this process, right? It's an inheritance. And so when we talk about building that inheritance, that includes the first step of our housing structure, which is immediate housing, which it's zero barrier, right? So, there are no term limits or time limits to when you can stay. And we will work with you to determine what the next steps should be. The second phase of our project is actually obtaining small plots of land, right? And building upon that, right? Never selling the land, but granting but like you said, granting that to our community members where they can own the actual structure, right? So that community land trust, it always stays within community. So I think this is something that we've never seen before, something that's inspiring, something that people, a lot of our community members are excited about, because they're finally getting a chance at life when you think about it, right? For many of the founders that are involved with the House of Tulip, this is the closest that we've ever been to the home ownership process. That speaks volumes. And I think it's just so powerful that, even this process inspires us to want more, to do more for ourselves, let alone other people, because it's showing us what we truly deserve. And that is so critical.
Yeah. And I mean, as you say, like, the basis for housing really is the basis for everything else, right? It's the basis to get a job. It's the basis to access everything else. Like, we've built a society where housing and home ownership really becomes the basis for so many things. And the exclusion of trans women from that process is one of the contributing factors to our deaths, right? That's a reality. What are some of the ways that people can, well, before I ask that question, what are the things that you're learning about this process and this different approach to ending violence, this more comprehensive approach that you hope will be replicated across the country? You're in New Orleans now, but if you were giving, what are the things that you're learning that you hope other people copy, essentially?
I just hope they copy the zero barrier sentiment that we're carrying with us. Like, yes, things will be tough, things will be difficult to navigate, but we're not going to give up on community, because we don't want community to give up on us, right? We're going to figure out ways to work with community members, but also realize that one specific approach does not apply to each individual community member. So moving forward, knowing that you have to have an individualized plan for each person that comes into your care, right? You have to, make sure that they are getting genuine gender affirming care, right? Not just in healthcare, but in housing. making sure that they feel comfortable accessing that education that you are providing, because ultimately that is your responsibility. So really taking on the challenge to really commit to walking community, to really being there and walking with community members each step of the way, guiding them each step of the way, right? And realizing and giving grace that people may fall behind a little bit, right? We have to be willing to give that grace and allow them to start over, because many of us have started over several times in many different situations. So it is just my hope that people will really take zero and housing first approaches and realize that just because you give housing doesn't mean that you can't venture off into other things. Realize that housing is the basis of addressing all of these issues. I know firsthand, right? I know that, you know, when I didn't have stable housing, a safe space to sleep, I wasn't looking for a job. I wasn't trying to get an education. I wasn't trying to see a primary care physician, right? I wasn't worried about the things that I was consuming, like food and even alcohol. I wasn't worried about that because I was in pure survival mode. I didn't have a support system, right? I didn't have people speaking life into me in some of those moments. So that's so critical for us to create these homes, right? These beloved homes, these communities, these networks of love and support. So that's what I want people across the country, across the world to move forward with, right?
Yeah.
Don't think of it as a program. Think of it as an inheritance, as a home, as a beloved home, you know, treat it as if it was your own personal space, right? And how you like things.
Yeah.
That's how we're moving at the House of Tulip.
Great. And I just wanted to let you know that some people in our audience are agreeing with you that it is a rough week. I just wanted to let you know that you are not alone in that. One person said, yes, rough week, rough year, that they feel you on that. So there are lots of people who are sharing the same sentiment. Jacinda Morrison is her name. So just so that you know that. I wanted to ask you lastly, what are the ways that people can support the House of Tulip?
People can support the House of Tulip by sharing our website, making a donation if you can, sending resources our way. If you know of some sort of opportunity, of some sort of partnership, educational resources that we could use to further educate ourselves as, you know, leaders in this movement and in this fight, please send it our way. If you have donations and you're in the New Orleans or the Louisiana area, send them our way. Reach out to us. If you want to, you know, have a future volunteering with the House of Tulip, reach out to us. All contributions aren't monetary, and you know, sometimes your time is the greatest gift that you can give. And so just reach out, you know, even if you're not in Louisiana or in New Orleans and you have a skill or a gift or a talent that you want to share, we can do it virtually. Reach out. Especially, we need to see good representation. We need to see representation of trans folks living and thriving and speaking life back into one another. So if you are a trans or gender non-conforming person who has, you know, has some sort of you play an instrument or you're a storyteller, something that you want to contribute to the community, please reach out to us. There's more than one way to get involved.
Great. Well, Mariah, thank you so much. I think we can end this interview by an audience comment, also from Jacinda Morrison, who said that what you're doing is wonderful. So I think that is the way that we all feel. Thank you so much for joining us during what is, as you say, a very, very, very tough day.
Mm-hmm.
You are watching Lives at Stake. That brings us to the end of our program for tonight. We wanted to make sure that we spotlighted and highlighted the issues of violence and the ways in which they're unfeigned during this unprecedented year so far, but also ways that you can, and we can all address violence And we had so many solutions tonight, from Bev's advice of ways that we can take action personally, regardless of whether we know someone who's trans or not, to comprehensive ways that we can rethink the safety and security of trans women, to the work of nonprofits from House of Tulip. We really hope that tonight's Lives at Stake on this issue has been really educational and hopefully positive, because at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be this way, and we can end the violence that is taking place against trans women and against all women. And we want to make sure that you leave with that hope tonight. This is Imara Jones. You are watching Lives at Stake. We will actually put in the in our chat what our next Lives at Stake is. It will be at the end of November. We hope that all of you can join us. Have a good night and be safe.